Now, when Veronica asked me to take part in this session, she said, could you identify 3 key challenges from your perspective? So the ones I identified are mainly geomorphological, but they do stray into other people's territory, and I'm sure they will be developed by John and Paul and so Michael subsequently. So to summarise first, the first ongoing challenge that I would identify is the continuation of the overstabilisation trend that we've been seeing since at least the 1960s. Now, climate change projections would sort of indicate that things are not going to change anytime soon. We're not going to go back to the Little Ice Age and cold, stormy conditions, which actually favoured the building of many of the big dune systems that we see in northwest Europe. We're going to carry on seeing increasing temperatures, particularly in the winter. There probably won't be any great change in rainfall or wind strength. There's a bit of uncertainty about what will happen to storminess, but certainly I think we can say that growing season will continue to extend. So it'll be almost the entire year round for the southwest of England, for example. Conditions will continue to be moist, favouring vegetation growth. So the issues we've had are going to continue into the future. There's some good news that things like atmospheric nitrogen deposition has been reducing, at least from transport and industrial sources in recent years, and those trends will probably continue as well. But the problem is now that everything is so stabilised, it's very difficult to remobilise things naturally. There just isn't sufficient wind energy in the system for that to occur naturally. Therefore, there will be an ongoing requirement for intervention for the foreseeable future. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge relates to climate change in a way, and that is the problem of shrinking coastal dunes. Rising sea level and coastal erosion are eating away at the seaward margin of many dune systems, as you can see out of the window here. That will also continue as sea level rises by anywhere between, say, 16 centimetres a metre or more over the next century. And just as an example, if we had a metre of sea level rise here at Braunton, we could expect the dune toe to recede by between 1 and 200 metres in that time period. And that would correspond to the loss of between 6.5 and 13 hectares, perhaps 5 to 10% of the total area of the dune system at the present time. So there will be a total loss of habitat area and also sand volume as the eroded sediment sort of heads down the coast into the estuary down here and so on. It's effectively lost from the system. The dominant waves on this coast here approach from just northwest and west, and so the sediment has been progressively taken down towards the south. And you can see there's been some recent accumulation in the area of the recent notching, and a bay is developing up here in the north, made worse by the visitor pressure, of course, but it's fundamentally due to natural processes. And there's no indication that the wave regime, the wind regime, are going to change anytime soon either. We'll probably see a continuation of that into the longer term. Added to this, there are problems at the back of the dune systems where there are a variety of assets behind them. There can be golf courses, there can be roads, housing estates, and so forth. So it's very difficult, even if you had mobile dunes, to allow the dune system to roll landwards. So effectively there's a squeeze process going on in many areas. In a big site like Braunton, that's not particularly a problem. You can accommodate it. But in narrow, smaller systems, you could lose the entire dune system. And that's already happened in a few places. Places like sort of Exmouth Frontage and up at Groom Point, where I was last week. Effectively all the dunes have gone, and you're left with a residual sort of shingly, mixed sand shingle beach in front of it there. So we're going to lose some dune sites altogether, or more dune sites, particularly the small ones. And that needs to be factored in one way or another. And then the third challenge identified was the problem of sort of conflicting dune interests. Dunes serve multiple purposes, not just nature conservation. They're natural flood defences, they're used for recreational, military activity, a variety of other things depending on where you are, water supply in the Netherlands, etc. and so forth. And often there are conflicts between the different sort of interests here. So it's difficult to get agreement on what should be done. People are nervous about destabilising dunes in some area because of the impact on the whatever behind it. Is one issue. Also, there's often a lack of agreement on the part of coastal flood risk management authorities as to what should be done. There are often conflicts between policies at different scales, from regional shoreline management policies to strategy studies to schemes and so forth. Different things are suggested for different reasons. And so one of the biggest challenges, I think, is getting people to sing off the same hymn sheet. And Paul will probably comment on that a bit more. But it's Another issue related to this is the timescale involved in getting decisions and agreement. It's very difficult to get licenses through and get through the planning system on a timescale which allows you to react to the conditions that you've assessed already. And again, I go back to the situation with the notching down here at Braunton. When the initial plans were drawn up, there was far less sand accumulation in front of those notches than you see today. Things have moved on. 5 or 6 years is a long time in terms of coastal processes. And so we need to somehow speed up the funding process, the planning application process, and the licensing process, which appear to be on geological timescales.
Thank you very much. What next? The next steps? Well, first of all, thanks very much for being able to be part of this project from letters of support at the start through to this. This is, I think, a unique moment in British sand dune conservation. This project and the Sands of Life project. We've seen loads of things, innovations, we've seen really creative things. There's much has been learned. We need to carry on learning, and we need to take that learning forward. And what a particular things to take forward in the next steps, and this project, the Dynamic Dunescapes project, has done so well on this, is about people. And I like to think of that as an integral ecology, right? An integral ecology. Because ecology is more than biology, right? It involves people as well. Now put that together with sand dunes. Sand dunes are worth it. All sand dunes are worth it, not just the SACs. All sand dunes are worth it. And we have to, I think, next steps, we need to be ambitious. We need to take on challenges. With the projects that we've seen with the Sands of Life and Dynamic Dunescapes, because we're in an extreme position where dunes are threatened habitats. They need urgent action. So we've got to think differently. We've got to think big. We've got to think large. We've got to think new ways. When we started off 30, 40 years ago, we were out stabilising sand dunes, planting mangroves and putting sand dune fences on. We've changed again, and I hope that I will be in 30 years' time, but loads of you will be, and I hope you're taking thinking forward. So take that idea of the Lawton Review on. Bigger, better, more, joined up. Now, as Ken's alluded to, joined up's difficult for sand dunes because they're on the coast, they're fragmented sites. But we can join them up functionally much more with other, in terms of their ecosystem function, with transitions into wetlands, working with other land uses. And this comes up where it says get people to sing from the same song sheet. There was a landmark conference in 1987 in Leiden, in the Netherlands, for sand dunes. And there was a model presented there of the dominance of processes on coastal dunes. And as Ken's talked about, climate is the overall control. The next overall thing is geomorphology, and then hydrology. It's only in the last 15, 20 years in this country that we've really started to do something about that. We need more. We need more thinking like that. Great working at the species and habitat level, that's required with our obligations. But think big. Think about the dominant processes. Create projects that work at these levels, and that we put that out to engineers, to policymakers, to people, foresters, and etc., and get them to sing from the same song sheet, because this is the reality of sand dunes. Don't create a habitat museum, create a living landscape. Don't create a habitat museum. Now, just the word of caution, remobilisation perhaps that we've seen may not be the default position everywhere. We have to be cautious about that. We have to be cautious about it. While it brings great benefits, interventions need to be country and place specific. But big interventions are justified because of the extreme situation that sand dunes are in and the urgent need to take action. But we need wise and informed and evidence-based decisions and interventions that restore dune ecosystem functioning on a broad scale. We need to give more attention to the margins. Golf, military, links golf, there's some research recently, British Isles for the RNA, 333 links courses, 333 links courses. That's a huge amount of courses. Right? Military land, other land uses. Thinking about also then the geomorphological system, the area of blown sand, our site-based conservation system doesn't reflect the actual area of the dune system. And therefore we also need to make not just inland connections more effective, but marine connections to be more effective, because that's the whole dune system. There are a lot of opportunities to do this. In England, there's the local nature reserve, local nature recovery programme, where it's replacing countryside stewardship. That specifically mentions coastal habitats, and particularly mentions sand dunes. They're real opportunities to move forward. So finally, I'd be glad to know, because I've done a lot more questions of this. Conservation is a social decision. We decided to do nature conservation. People decided to do nature conservation. So people are as much part of nature and nature conservation as is wildlife. So therefore we need a dune network. And that dune network is not just country-based, England, Wales, Scotland, it's UK. It's not just UK, it's European. And it's not just European, it's global. We need to add those connections. We need to keep ourselves refreshed and on the ball. It needs to include people outside of our little circle of conservationists, golfers, the military, other land users. The handbook that we produced for this project, the Site Manager's Handbook, could be taken forward with a dune network in this country, with a series of thematic meetings to keep the good practice up to date and refreshed. We could come up with a 3 to 5 year programme to do that. And then there's some easy things, and this to pass over to my colleagues. There's things like immediate challenges that we could pick up straight away, linking into European networks. With Reinhardt, we've heard about the Dunescapes programme and the importance of invasive species. We could pick that up. So let's keep the sand dune network going and recruit more dune nerds.
Well, thanks very much, Paul. That was great. Over to Maike.
Yes, hello, I'm Maike Isermann from Northwest Germany, and my background is vegetation and ecology, and I started dunes since my diploma, so it's a long time ago. I started in the Wannsee area, then my PhD is in the Baltic area. I have visited a lot of meetings, so I know a lot of dune areas, a little bit, of course only due to the excursions in Europe. And I do it the way around, like Paul. First, many years I was at the university, but then since 5 years I'm now in the national park. I say administration, we call it authority, but that word I don't like. And in the national park of the Lower Wattensee, of the Lower Saxon Wattensee National Park, I'm responsible for, of course, for dunes, for all things in dunes, and my second leg are the invasive species, terrestrial only. I have a little bit low knowledge about algae, but not really. So, and that is the reason why I like to focus here on the invasive alien species. I discussed it yesterday already with some other people. I think in the next years we still need an early warning system, a cross-border, as Paul said, of course, and we should not only focus on the union list of alien species. You know, I don't know, 40 species maybe are inside. We have to do our own list for our dunes, because it really is different from the union list. And to get an early warning system, we need a data flow, a general data flow from local level, from each ranger to a higher level, maybe to GBIF. I don't know where you map, how you map your invasive species. Our data are going maybe 1 or 2 years later, but at least they are going to GBIF, so anyone can take it. Of course, we need further management, but yesterday I thought it's nice to remove invasive species, but we should think broader, as Paul already said. We should think that we include other targets. like to create, for example, you will remove the Rosa rugosa shrub and you will get open space. You have a dynamic sand. Do not seed any grass in the open space. Let it open. So you have a different target with one measure. Maybe it's better for planning. I don't know. We will see. In my country, for me, it will be easier to say, oh, I will not remove something. I will do something for the habitat. I will support the entire habitat quality. And one step to go there is, for example, removing invasive alien species, but it's not the priority argument. So, and I think as possible, you should include monitoring and evaluation of your measures. For example, Luc told maybe sometimes it's not possible due to financial reasons. But it is necessary to have small or large reports what you have done, and it's really necessary to publicate it so we can exchange our knowledge not only in the UK, please around the whole world maybe. At first we will try Europe and then more. And not only best practice, please, also bad practice, yes? It's sometimes even better to know what not working. And important is, maybe not easy for us, to have the small reports in native language, but also in English, please. Then, if it is in English, then we, in Germany maybe, we can translate it to German back. And then I can change it to our managers, because also some people in our area don't like to read the English reports. So it's necessary. It's really important to have this knowledge exchange across borders. And there I came to the next point. I think we need a communication platform in what form ever. And now let me say at the end some aspects about the network. Probably you know me from the mailing list that I do honorably. And I think it's the network, the dune network is really important. You can ask me if you look for an expert for some removal of some species, then probably I have the contact or can spread it around and you can send you help. Your network at the moment is only a mailing list. I think it should be more professional, but please tell me if you have ideas how we get funding, because I cannot do it in my regular work. The network, by the way, lives from your input, so please send me all things. If they are so small or so large, please, I will put it in. But the network is living from your input. And if you have questions, please send it around. So now coming to the younger people. So at the moment it's only a web page or a mailing list and not so professional. Should we go more to the social media? Is it important for you to go with LinkedIn or others, to have there the network also, or only a few aspects of it? Please tell me if you have any idea. And then the greatest thing is how can we establish a real European dune network, probably on a higher level, on the EU level or somewhere else, if you're going. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maike. So last but certainly not least is John.
Thank you. Well, you can all pelt me with tomatoes because I was employed to stabilise sand dunes. Yeah, when I was about 24, I joined, I was appointed as the project officer for the Sefton Coast Management Scheme, which was an initiative by Merseyside County Council, Sefton Borough Council, and the Countryside Commission. So I was a kind of quasi-Heritage Coast officer. And my job was to be the glue that glued the Heritage Coast, the Sefton Coast together, National Trust, Natural England, and the local authority, golf courses, everything else. But at the time, and if you look back at the history, the Formby Point area was a classic example of uncontrolled recreation pressure. There were literally what you might call a delta of erosion going out from the car parks. It was the sort of, and in those days, this was the classic thing. Recreation pressure was the first thing to be controlled before we talked about conservation. So there I was, and I got the job because I'd been a conservation volunteer in East Lothian in Scotland, which at the time was almost like the world leader in dune restoration work. Well, certainly in the UK, they had a 20-year programme there already, going from the 50s. And then people said, oh, you ought to go to Holland, you ought to go and see the Dutch, because the Dutch are really good at stabilising dunes. So I was very fortunate to get a Churchill Fellowship to go for a month to the Netherlands. And this is exactly 40 years ago, to go to the Netherlands and Denmark to look at primarily restoration techniques, recreation management techniques. We did talk about nature, we talked about forestry, but the whole thing was really a look at that Dutch situation. So I spent 22 years with the Sefton Coast Management Scheme, and I jumped ship in a way when it became the Sefton Coast Partnership, where it is now. And having just run a life project with Paul, I then became a life monitor. And so for the last 20 years or so, I've been very close to the European Habitats Directive, Article 17 reports, and following all the dune life projects across Europe. So I've been involved and been, the projects in Belgium, projects in the Netherlands, and if you look at every 6 years there's a state of European nature report published. And this is based on the reports from the member states. So the last one, which was published in 2020, is unfortunately, the last report which will include the UK data. Nine member states make up the Atlantic region. And the UK, at that time, as reported in 2018, every single sand dune habitat in the UK was classed as unfavourable, bad, and declining. And that is partly why you have a life project. Because it's coming from that, the life project is hopefully trying to bottom out that and start the process of recovery. And so I've been doing quite a lot of work on the kind of, when I was working for Life, I was the kind of dune nerd in the Life team, so I was able to kind of collect this European data. The three issues that I sort of thought about for this session. The first one is partly covered, but it's this idea about bare sand. And bare sand can be from the hectares of new mobility down to fractions of a square metre. And I very much was influenced, I think, by Mike Howe from Natural Resources Wales. And Mike, I think, in some ways, is very much the driver behind certainly the Sands of Life project, showing that for invertebrates, you need a whole range of different degrees of bare sand, from very open areas. So I think there's this sort of holistic approach we need from the foreshore right the way through to the back, to see the rabbits, the smaller blowouts at the back. And again, I've also been very influenced by Mark Van Til's work, and that's great, he brought the brochure, and we got that brochure translated with Mark's help. We got the Dutch brochure translated into English. And I think similarly, the report that Luc mentioned about notches in the Netherlands, I think that would also be very good to translate, because I think it would really help this understanding of what we're doing. So that was the sort of bare sand issue. Bare sand is vital. The second issue is something I've done, stimulated by Reinhardt and Life Dunescapes, is having a review of alien species in the UK and Ireland. So I've gone back for like a 50-year back in time review, and I'm pleased that Veritas published it on the Dynamic Dunescape website. So the report is there. It's a sort of challenge report, so that's what I'm trying to say now. That we have been battling away with sea buckthorn and conifers for 50 years. We're still in the middle of that battle, in a sense. But in the meantime, we have strong new problems, Rosa rugosa being the big one, and I think we do lack a strategy for that, where we've only just started recording it 10 years ago, we started to address it 5 years ago. That's a bad one. And then the other one, which there seems to be no easy answer for, is Piri-Piri-Bur in the Lindisfarne area. That's a species we need to get to grips with, because it's not yet in mainland Europe. And were that to get there, that would be a real problem. So there's those species, and then there are species, there's a whole range of these exotic species we're looking at. We need to look at our resources. I think what we need to do is take the work that you've been doing through Dynamic Dunescapes and then start talking to the non-native secretariat to try to get a word into government. So I think that's something that needs to be done, and to see if we can get the prioritisation and the resources. And my other issue, I think, is the whole thing to do with the partnership. From Ben's introduction, I was just amazed at this partnership. And I think what Elinia said yesterday, she said this was an outstanding project, and it is. In terms of life, this project is way above most projects in terms of what it's achieved and the partnership. What I like about this, when I look in the room, I don't see people forming into their groups. Everybody is mixed. You are one huge project, and that's its strength. And I think at the end of this project, it's time to go into phase 2, which is to keep that partnership, strengthen that partnership, make it UK-wide. And my final little thing was, we need to talk about Brexit. We need to talk about how do we maintain the links with Europe, which has been touched on already. So I think that's
great. That's really good. Thank you. Okay, well, it's over to you. Any questions?
Hello, it's Ben McCarthy from the National Trust. I just wanted to pick up the point about invasive species, because we're missing a trick, it seems. That there's lots of conversations like this recognising the impact of invasive species on sand dunes, but lots of other habitats as well. Yet it's really poorly reflected in some of the designated site mechanisms which are there to improve condition of sites. And I can't quite remember the figure, but I looked at English SSSIs, not sand dunes, but English SSSIs, a little while ago, and they're only identified in a very, very small proportion of sites as being a reason for unfavourable condition. And because those SSSI reporting mechanisms then feed into things like agri-environment and other funding mechanisms, it's really important we fix that. So where invasive species are impacting our sand dune designated sites, we flag that so we get better at drawing down the available funding. And I just wonder if anyone's got any views on how best to do that. It's like an elephant in the room for me.
Well, I think first of all, I definitely agree with you, because the IPENS project, there was a LIFE project which produced the site improvement plans. If you look at that database, there's there's only like one site with Carpobrotus on it, or one site with pampas grass or something on it. And the reality is there's a lot more out there. I think, but this actually is also reflected in the European recording. When you look at the European data, it is not coherent at all. Some countries are very good at it, some countries are very poor at it. And strange enough, for Belgium, for example, the official data shows there's no issue. And then you see Reinhardt's presentation, and it's completely the opposite. I just think it's got missed. I think we've suffered with invasive species. It wasn't on the radar, and it's taking a long time to get onto the radar. So when the first Welsh strategy was being discussed about 15 years ago, invasive species was not even on the list of threats. But suddenly, it has appeared. And somehow we've got to get the problem is that sand dunes nationally are tiny, less than 1% of habitat. So how do you influence the government when you're talking about problems on 1%, which aren't economic problems, which aren't health problems, but they are habitat and landscape problems? So no answer really.
I'd say that things like invasive alien species is one of a suite of immediate challenges in our wider environment, particularly on sand dunes, and they do deserve swift, urgent action. However, when we do that, we've also got to keep him not kind of like I'm a football fan and I'm in mourning after Liverpool's result last night, but still European. But we can't. I don't think we can take our eye off the ball, so to speak, of the bigger issues with sand dunes. Because if you go on that model I've talked about of the dominance of processes, the invasive alien species issue, for instance, is an urgent one. It is crucial. It does require attention, but it's down the bottom in terms of the dune processes, right? We must make sure that we give more attention to the big issues, particularly hydrology and particularly geomorphological processes. They're the long-term dominant processes.
Okay, thank you. Maike, you wanted to say something?
Paul, you're right, but if the invasive species have really a large or strong influence, maybe they stop scent dynamics, then they are the bottom or the top, whatever you want, from the problem. You have to remove them, and then the natural geomorphologic and ecological processes can stay or can evolve in their natural process.
Then this is where we need to have a holistic view of sand dunes, because if you tackle, for instance, invasive alien species and you get money available, however that is, get out your magic wand, let's get the solution. But you can then say, well, at the same time, we will tackle these big issues, not to have a myopic view on them. We have to have a big view on sand dunes. So it's really important that we don't have a narrow view. We take a wide view always, and wherever possible, even if you get money for like, I love natterjack toads, I spend half of my life with them, right? And if you're working with natterjack toads, but at the same time, you might get money for that, for species, that you actually say, well, actually we're going to be working with the hydrology, we're actually going to work with the geomorphology, because that benefits the species. So you've got to think up all the time, be ambitious, trade up.
Does anyone else want to follow up on the invasive species before we go on to the next question?
What?
Yeah.
Hello, Sam Provost from Belgium. I want to take the opportunity, to do a call for help. We had the workshop in Belgium last year, and we want to make a publication out of the results. But we need help from people like you, who have a good local knowledge on invasives, to help us with this publication. And it's also an opportunity to network with the IS people and to develop these ideas. So a warm call, if someone wants to help, has got good botanical knowledge, just please come and see me, and we can exchange addresses and we can work together. Thank you.
Following up on that before we move on?
Not following up.
New question?
Andy Byfield. I was just wondering, because we've all been to Braunton, so you saw it yesterday, and so it's a useful working example. We've obviously, I think, at Braunton done perhaps bigger scrapes than other people have in some of the other Dunescapes sites. I get the feeling that some people like the scale of work we're doing. I suspect others might think, rightly, there are no willow bushes or whatever at all left where we've been doing work. I was just wondering, we're talking about networks, we're talking about databases and all that. Where should we be in, say, 10 or 20 years in a place like this? I mean, what should it look like if it is going to be a stunning exemplar of, I mean, it is a great place, but a stunning exemplar of favourably managed sand area. I mean, you know, we've had from Ken the fact that the climate's changing, so we're getting warmer, wetter winters, which means it's ever more just wanting to vegetate and go to woodland. So what should we be aiming for in terms of how it looks?
Initial response.
Okay.
There's the overall controlling factor of climate, which will do that, but it'll look like what we want it to look like. That's the short answer, right? It depends on the landscape that we see out there is far from untouched by human hands, and yet it's valued and cherished. It will look like it will be dictated by physical processes, climate, in the end, and then the rest of it will be up to what it could turn into one perfect standard. If you wanted to, you could turn it into a great big car park if you wanted to, right? But, so it'll be what we want it to be.
Yeah. I think ideally you would like to see a mosaic of things. With looking out of the window here, you'd see areas of bare sand, what look like parabolic dunes with blowouts, and so it would be a dotted landscape of white and green, so it would be scenically attractive. That's one thing, regardless of its nature significance. It's just how it looks. And from a geomorphological point of view, we'd like to see it remain as a landform assemblage of note. You know, that people refer to that. That's a good example of a geomorphological system, apart from anything else kind of thing. And that means having examples and areas of active processes within it, where things are changing, where there are landforms at varying scales, from small to relatively large. Now, I think that's the desire. The question is, what's deliverable? Now, I think that some of that is deliverable by allowing greater and more regular intervention within the dune systems. For example, allowing trail bikes and sort of dune buggies and things in certain areas, maybe rotating them in there, encouraging the military to make heavier use, letting them go off the tracks, you know, bring in tracked vehicles and things of that sort. It's entirely doable. These are resilient systems on geomorphological and geological timescales. It may look as though these things are being damaged in the short term, but recovery can be very quick. So I'd encourage that sort of movement in that direction.
Thanks, Maike.
Yes, as Paul told, it's depending from what we want, and from the union view, from the habitat manual, you all know a good status of habitat quality we only get if we have, as Ken said, a mosaic of young and old succession stages of each habitat. So in your small area, probably if you have the target to have, or you will, if you have the aim to have a good quality status in union sense, then probably you have to do gardening in your small area, to have open space in dry and in wet areas. Then you have the middle succession stages with a little bit open space, and then you have the older stages. If you like gardening, in other regions of Europe, like in northwest Germany, we say if you have enough natural dynamic, the large processes and long-term processes, they stay there, they are stable. We have eastern parts of our islands without coastal protection where we have dynamic, natural dynamic from geomorphological processes. And there we have all these small mosaics of different habitat stages. But of course, we have the problem with the areas on the western parts of the island where we have coastal protection and all is closed densely. So there, normally we have to do gardening, but in the national park it is a bit difficult.
I'd just add that I think the word beauty is important. I think a lot of what we hear is we're striving for something that is beautiful. We're not necessarily hung up by the Habitats Directive. We actually want to create something that is awe-inspiring, and that I think is very important. And I think that is one of our unique selling points. So that brings us back to people and communities. We want to, at the end of the day, we want to go in there and just be gobsmacked by the sheer beauty of it. And if we can achieve that, that's what I think that's, you know, the Habitat Directive should allow all that to happen.
I'll just have a sort of chairman's prerogative then to follow up with another question. So at Braunton, will we ever be able to move to a situation where it's kind of the mobile sound is kind of self-sustaining, or are we going to have to go back every 5, every 10 years to put in new notches? What's your view on that?
It's possible to create small-scale self-sustaining features. Not necessarily, you don't need the big notches for that. I think they're harder to make self-sustaining. But you can create small sort of bow-shaped depressions in the crests of some of the higher dune ridges, for example. And what you want to do is to encourage the swirling of the wind, encouraging local turbulence and scours and keep the thing clear. So I think that's sustainable on a small scale. And you might have to initiate some of these artificially to begin with and do it again, you know, from time to time. But there is evidence from other sites like Amesdale and elsewhere where this has worked already.
I've been looking at with a colleague of mine, Tom Smith, where we've been looking at this with these source of shape blowouts and how they work, and to make it simple, they're kind of like cannibalistic, you know, they're self-sustaining, they keep going, and it all depends. I mean, in the manual, if you read the manual, one of the first things we put in there, it's very simply we've developed, you know, sand dunes in this essence are really, really simple: sand, wind, and water. And then understand your vegetation. So if you understand how the sand and the wind operate, that's the key to success. Of course it gets amazingly technical, some of us spend our lives getting into the detail of it. But you know, don't forget the headline point: sand, wind, water. Right? So work with those.
But that does mean, Ken, from what you're saying, is that in 10 years' time we'll have to come back and put in some more notches.
Or you could rejuvenate the notches you've already got.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, it depends on how much follow-up management is done now, for example. I mean, you might need to, I mean, they're relatively shallow, these notches, so there's lots of roots showing, and they'll regenerate. But there are various ways of sort of stopping that or holding it back. In some cases, grazing might do it. In other cases, chemical spraying, although I don't really like chemical spraying and stuff. Again, encouraging the passage of tracked vehicles, you know, through those notches. That's a good way of keeping the road.
Probably,
Yeah.
You can ask the military for that.
I think if you go back to like the Ratcliffe and the Nature Conservation Review in 1977 and the criteria, one of the original criteria was fragility. I don't think that really applies to sand dunes in a lot of ways. Sensitivity is a more appropriate term. They are sensitive to change, but they're also resilient places, and I think we have to be conscious of that, of what a living dunescape really is.
Thank you.
We've got one follow-up here and then
Rachel Mills, Senior Coast Habitat Specialist in Natural England. Just say we've been grappling with what favourable looks like and should look like for coastal habitats, and we've been writing definition of favourable conservation status for coastal habitats. Sue Rees wrote that in 2019, ex-colleague who actually helped set up Dynamic Dunescapes, one of the key drivers behind this, and Graham Weaver. So yeah, we've been looking at climate change, recreation pressures, all sorts of things, invasives and so forth, and where we think the systems are going to go, and what we trying to redefine what we think is favourable, which is probably going to change from what we think now. And that leads me on to say probably so we're doing that, definitions, and then we're looking at strategies, which is actually implementing it on the ground, what actions we want to see. So that's something that's coming in the next few years. And then another thing, just as I've got the mic, I think we all need to get together nationally to rewrite the Common Standards Monitoring Guidance, because it's way out of date, and that's where we can put invasive species in and write it large and have the processes, because that is equally something we're grappling with, is geomorphology, hydrology. If you don't get that right, don't understand it, then you're not going to get anywhere.
Mark Vertil from the Netherlands. I would like to add something to the discussion we just had about how we'd like to have our dunes in a period of 10, 20, 30 years. How do we keep the dynamics going on? Human interventions were mentioned. What we are discussing in the Netherlands now is there's a lot of times we're working with fixed grazing regimes in areas. And maybe it would be an opportunity to work as more flexible grazing regimes, having years with a large grazing density followed by years with low density. And of course, rabbit is a keystone species we would prefer to have in our areas, but that's difficult with all the diseases. So cattle or other animals, large grazers, could be introduced on different levels of density. And that would also maybe also help us keeping the dynamics going on.
Do you want to respond?
Yes, but Mark, I think they have here a rotating principle of grazing already.
Yeah, but maybe they should fair. I think it's a fair point, because the traditional knowledge about grazing tends to be, if you're going to introduce grazing, set it at a level and keep it at that level. What you're suggesting is actually going against that, and sort of saying no, you don't have to keep your grazing the same all the time. Right. You can mix it around, which would be different to quite a lot of advice at the moment.
I completely agree. If we think about what we know about historical grazing on sand dunes, the very name Braunton Burrows, Newborough, Warren, etc., they were farmed landscapes with this alien species of rabbit, and then if they brought sheep on or cattle, they were shepherded or herded, and that would mean a shifting pattern of grazing. And we've seen grazing practices that if we can get large areas, if we can have different patterns, that gives more grain and interest to the landscape and also the vegetation communities. And perhaps we need to think further as well with different types of grazing animals, large moons or maybe that bash the place around a little bit, why not? This is good. Uniform, if you can't graze, you mow, and that's a good second thing, but it introduces uniformity, right, which in the long term is not terribly desirable. So we shouldn't aim for uniformity in our grazing regimes. Sand dunes and mosaics, the varied places, they need constant change to them in lots of ways.
Okay, I want to add something about the goal discussion. Luc Gelen from the Netherlands, or Mr. Yellow as Paul knows me. There's two things, I think. There's nothing as predictable as natural processes, and there's nothing as predictable as people's interest. So I think we need dynamic goals, setting new goals every 5 years or so. Look what's happening outside. We don't know what climate change really will do to our systems. So we need adaptive goals, I think. And have some discussion on that every year, every 5 years or so, on your sides.
Well, we were stabilising dunes years
Yes.
I think it's really important that we know. It's true, wasn't it? I'm taking my students out next week, postgrads, to Aberfrau, and I'm hopefully going to see a fence that I put in a blanad there in 1987. It's been there for ages. We're posting by a fence. We put things in. Things change, and we have to keep moving on. I made that in my point of the presentation. Here we are, this fantastic project, loads of learning. But we can't stop at this, we have to move on. We have to keep developing ideas and moving things forward. Dunes deserve it.
We deserve it.
Hi, Nick Edwards, National Resources Wales, manage the sites on Gower. Question for John and the panel, and picking up on what the board has said. I've got slides, John, from NCC days of people planting marron grass and putting in two fences, one either side of where the people could walk, and then the boardwalks. And we were lucky in Oxford until '95 because we had a really good facility there for education, and continuity from '95 till about 2005-10, and the people were still coming back from schools and colleges because they were there as students, they remember it, they're now teachers. So we've got a huge amount of people coming in, probably about close to, I think we've got about 10,000, something like that, as a resource for education across the board, from small kids locally all the way through to postgrad. And someone picked up on it yesterday. It was the BTCC handbook, you know, and it's, you know, we're talking about manuals, we're talking about, you know, the Bible and whatever, and I think as a group of people within the room, you're always preaching to the converted, aren't you? Because we know the score, we're part of a group that is doing this, you know. But beyond us and outside, even at the highest level of education, this is the book, this is the thing. And weirdly, I mean, a couple of years ago, Swansea Bay are doing sand dunes to stop the sand going onto the road, so they decided rather than clearing the road all the time, they build up a series of dunes. And I got a phone call saying, oh look, you know, we're building dunes, where we can get some marrow in front to plant it up. So we say, well, why do you want to stabilise some of them? But even on that thinking, the level was, this is the first thing we need to do, is plant it with marrow. And I think it's bizarre that after 40 years gone, that's still the manual, and no one's even rewritten it or replaced it. And I think, you know, beyond this room, no one's going to do that. And why aren't we doing it?
Well, I think we should not demonise those people who are still planting marrow grass and putting up fences. I went to Croy Bay yesterday, the day before, and there at the caravan site, they've put up chestnut-bearing fencing, planted marrow grass, and put up signs saying dune restoration area. But they are concerned that the sand is going to blow into their caravan site. So you can see immediately the dilemma those people have got. And a lot of local authorities will be doing the same. Nuisance sand blowing over roads. And as Paul mentioned, all these tiny dune systems managed by local authorities all around the country. They haven't got this, you know, and this is why, in some ways, greatest dynamic Dunescape is, we're dealing with the big sites, we're dealing with the jewels in the crown. So I agree that there's actually, if you, in that BTC manual, there's actually some quite good stuff in it about generally, you know, understanding sand dunes. There is some stuff there that's generally definitely dodgy. But there were other manuals which were equally bad. One published by NERC, and there's also ones published by Scottish Natural Heritage, which also had that. So I think
Construction Commission for Scotland.
Yeah.
The whole series suite of
reports. Now, some of the stuff is quite good. Some of the stuff on recreation management. I mean, the idea, if you want to guide people through a sand dune system, use the simplest method possible. A couple of white top posts, and people will walk it. And then if you want to change the path, you don't need to bother with all the fencing and boardwalks. You can still get people to go where you want them to go. So I feel at the moment the current handbook has nothing about recreation in it at all. And even the basics of recreation, like don't build a gravel footpath where you've got sand rain, because in 5 years' time that's going to be under the sand. You need to understand the sand rain on site to decide what kind of recreation hardware, if any, is worth putting in. So I mean, I totally agree. It should be done, and I think it should be done for that community. And all around the country, I think we've got more and more of these kind of coast care type groups developing, who are really concerned about litter on their beaches. They want to do the right thing for the sand dunes. I think globally, places like Australia and New Zealand are all over the place, these community groups. So I think there should be a manual aimed at that audience.
I think we've got to be careful with this, because it's the contingent nature of knowledge, isn't it? Our understanding changes. And I remember taking Liz Agate round on our sand dunes to write that book. And what we have to realise is that we need to make our sand dune managers' toolbox larger and larger and larger, right? And the bigger toolkit you have, sometimes you don't use the tools very often, but they still need to be in there. And there's a whole suite of learning there that still needs to be there, but you might not use it very often.
Okay. I mean, the Swansea Bay sand control case was mentioned. Well, I actually designed that. I was involved in it from the start. And one of the problems was convincing the engineers, the highway engineers and the parks people, that this was a good idea. They saw any dune in front of the road there as a problem. And what they traditionally do is just bulldoze them all flat, you know, down the beach, and of course the problem comes back and so forth. But it took about 5 years to convince them that it was even worth trying to trap the sand there on the beach in front of that section. There's resilience. So it doesn't matter how many guidebooks and handbooks you've got, they've got fixed views, you know.
But this is where the things like I think post-project, life projects, you know, we need, and this is the last point, we need a renaissance of the sand dune network. We need a renaissance of the sand dune network. And that sand dune network shouldn't be just the people in this room, right? It needs to include the golf community. It needs to include the Ministry of Defence. It needs to include civil engineers. It needs to include foresters. We need to have a wide perspective on it. And I'll put a challenge out. For my university, I can put in some money to do this. Anyone got deep pockets? Come forward, right? let's make this happen, right? And also, as a good citizen, right? Don't forget, there's the retained EU law bill going through at the moment, at the end of this year. As citizens, take action on that to protect our environment.
Okay, well, I really need to bring it to an end there. So thank you very much, panel. That was a really fascinating debate. The key thing for me, I think, is to move forwards is how do we keep the kind of network, how do we build the network? It's been fantastic having such a varied range of people here in the last few days, but we really need to kind of get the sand and shingle network going and make sure that we can continue to have this kind of knowledge exchange going into the future. So I think people who are interested in that, and I guess probably all of us are, we need to be kind of working on that. So I think I will kind of make a commitment to kind of work with Paul, see if we can find some funding to support that. Next year there'll be another conference, because it'll be the Sands of Life end of project conference, likely to be in May next year. So there'll be another opportunity for this kind of gathering. I'm not 100% sure what we're going to do yet, but hopefully we'll be able to get quite a lot of people together. But we need to carry on, don't we, and make sure this knowledge exchange is happening, not just in the UK, but across Europe, and as you say, actually beyond that. But because it's so important, we learn so much from these events, and we must carry on with that. But anyway, I'd like to thank the panel for a really fascinating discussion, and let's kind of take some of these things forward. So thank you very much indeed.